Well, what happens here in the next week or two when people open their quarterly statements from, their mutual funds and their 401k and their IRAs, and when they see what's happened to their money, and when you lay over that the fact that the oldest baby boomers are turning 62 this year and maybe would like to retire soon?
There is a massive negative wealth effect. The value of your home now has fallen at least 25% from the peak. Now the value of your stock investment and savings has fallen by about 25% from the peak, and that's why consumption is falling, income is falling, jobs are falling, the value of your home is falling, the value of your stock investment is falling. There is a credit crunch. Debt ratios are high. Debt servicing ratios are rising because of the reset of mortgages, credit cards, auto loans, and student loans. Oil prices are high, food prices are high, purchasing power is low, and we are in the middle of a consumer recession. We are in a severe consumer recession. Now for 4 months in a row, starting in June, July, August, and September, consumption based on the data we have, hard data, has fallen for the very first time since 1991. During the 2001 recession, there was not a single quarter of falling consumption. And since consumption is 71% of GDP, the falling consumption is going to mean an ugly and severe recession. Until we reduce the debt burden of the household sector, this recession is going to continue. So any rescue plan should include also debt write-downs for the household sector, especially their mortgages. Otherwise, the recession is going to become even more severe.
Nouriel, I want to jump in here with a little bit of a historical perspective before Ken takes us to the president. If you look back at almost the French experiment, if we consider the nationalization and determination of which banks survived, it's almost dirigiste. It's almost like middle 20th century France. Are we going back to a social capitalism of another time, or is this a new territory that we will go to?
No, of course there will be more government intervention in the economy, but even in the best cases of banking crisis that were resolved ideally, like Sweden, Norway, and Finland, there was a temporary nationalization of the banks because there is no other alternative. The banks go belly up and nobody else is going to buy it. The government is going to take them over. Of course, you can work out their problems, restructure their debts, and then resell them back to the private sector. But you need to have government intervention, and that government intervention in some cases is going to be government nationalization of some parts of the banking system. Has happened over and over again. I think the lesson is a different one. This administration was so fanatically into the laissez-faire free markets, and free markets need regulation, supervision, and so on of the financial system. So they went to an extreme which they did not believe in any regulation. Because of that, they caused the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, and now they've gone to the other extreme, and the action they've taken look like the Soviet Union. If you think about it, bailout of Bear Stearns, of AIG, of Fannie and Freddie, injection of hundreds of billions of dollars liquidity, $700 billion of this rescue package. So we've gone from one extreme of laissez-faire ideology and zealotry to the other extreme. We look like the Soviet Union right now. Why? Because you have to have a middle road. The middle road says be pragmatic, don't be ideological, and realize that financial markets without rules and regulation are like the law of the jungle, where mania and craziness and risk-taking becomes excessive. So they've destroyed the market system through their ideology, and now we've gone to the other extreme. That's what has happened.
Nouriel, we're going to have on the show tonight Jean-Charles Roche of Toulouse, who's one of the world's experts on banking crises. And there's a single sentence early in his classic book where he says, look, this is just about the politicians. Which form of politics are we going to go back to if it is not the laissez-faire run amok that you just spoke of?
We have to go to a being pragmatic and less ideological. There was this ideology of self-regulation that meant no regulation, of market discipline that did not work, of internal risk management models, and the reality is that when the music plays, you got to dance, and nobody's listening to the risk managers, and reliance of rating agencies that had massive conflicts of interest. So we have to go back to simple rules and simple regulation supervision of the financial system. If you base yourself on principle and self-regulation means nonsense, because financial markets are driven by greed, and therefore that greed has to be tempered by the fear of losses, reducing moral hazard, and simple regulation supervision. If if you believe in free markets, you need rules and regulation, because markets do not work without rules and without institutions. If there are no rules and there are no institutions, it's the law of the jungle, and you create the kind of financial disaster like the one we're experiencing right now. That's the most important lesson.
It's been suggested, Professor Roubini, that one way out of this is to solve the housing crisis, and then everything else will fall into line. One proposal to solve the housing crisis is to have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which essentially belong to the government now, and just have them drive down mortgage rates and make housing more affordable for more people. Is that a viable solution?
I don't think that you'll be able to push down mortgage rates much further. Of course, with the nationalization of Fannie and Freddie, the premium that they pay has fallen, and mortgage rates have fallen by about 50 basis points. But that reduces the debt servicing burden of the average household by about $45 per month. That's nothing. The average household has a debt burden of mortgages, of credit cards, of auto loans, student loans, and for some of them, that burden is unbearable. So whenever you have a debt problem, if it's a country, say Argentina or Russia or Ecuador, they default, they reduce the face value of the debt, and they start growing fast again. When a corporate has too much debt, it goes into Chapter 11. You reduce the face value of the debt, it starts producing and hiring and growing again. Same thing for the household sector. The good chunk of the household sector today is insolvent. Because of that, they stop consuming. You need to have across-the-board debt reduction. That's how you resolve a debt overhang problem. Until you do it and you put it into the program, buying the stuff and parking it somewhere is not going to make a difference. You cannot just use Fannie and Freddie to push down interest rates. That's not the way it works. The debt level has to be reduced. It's not a question of freezing the resets of interest rates. At this point, you need face value debt reduction, because otherwise people are going to lose their homes or walk away from their homes.
Nouriel, to squeeze us in the next couple of minutes here before we hear from the president, and this has been a debate not only on Ken's show but mine, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this. If you have this debt reduction, if you have this wealth reduction, by definition you get disinflation, but if you have an impulse of capital coming in from the government, that's a sense of reflation. Which will win out here? Will we see a Jim Grant-like reflation, or do we see a disinflation, as Alan Meltzer would suggest?
In my view, the process is going to be mostly disinflationary, because we're entering now a severe recession, and this severe recession, you're going to have a slack in goods market with demand falling relative to supply, and that means less pricing power for the firms. You're going to see slack in the labor market that you already see with unemployment rate rising, and that's going to control wage and labor costs. And now you're seeing also a slack in commodity prices, where the commodity prices have fallen by 20% relative to their peak. They're going to fall even more in this U.S. and global recession, and therefore inflation is going to be the least of the problem that the central banks of the world, whether it's the Fed or ECB or others, will have to face. Downside risk to growth and downside risk to financial stability are going to be the paramount concerns of the central bank. Inflation is not going to be a problem, in my view, for the time being.
Professor Roubini, you listen to the president. What are your thoughts?
My thought is that, is cheap talk. What he's saying is not going to make any difference, and some of the things he's saying are misleading when he says that actually a taxpayer could make a profit out of these things. In every banking crisis, there is a significant fiscal cost involved in bailing out financial institutions, and the idea that these assets at some point are going to be worth much more is nonsense, because many of these assets are impaired and are going to end up into default and foreclosure. So we have to recognize there's going to be a fiscal cost, and if there's a fiscal cost, you have to make sure that the taxpayer is going to have an upside, and that's why this plan should have included bigger warrants, bigger public participation in the banking system, bigger injection of public capital, and people realize there's a bailout of the reckless lenders and bankers, and that's why they voted against it. And just saying we should go ahead and do it again doesn't make much sense.